This week, shops and activities are resuming in England. Of course, we've seen the pictures. It means more of us also are going to be taken to the roads. Questions remain about the safety of some of the hundreds of miles of smart motorways at the moment. They're the ones known as ALR, or All Lanes Live, the stretches of road where the hard shoulder has been replaced with a live lane, which can be closed if a vehicle breaks down or there's an accident. I've spoken to Niaz Shazad. His mum, Nargis Begum, was killed after the car she had broken down in on a smart stretch of the smart road, a motorway, the M1 in South Yorkshire in 2018. He told me what happened that day.
The car ran into some problems. Their car essentially just lost all power. And before we knew it, Dad's recollections are essentially he was driving along normal speed, and next minute he's having to kind of cut across, 2 or 3 lanes to get to the left-hand side. Now, completely unawares, initially he wasn't even aware of the fact that he wasn't in a hard shoulder and the fact he was in a live lane, so he pulled it over as far as possible to the left-hand side. And number of calls, back and forth to try and, decipher where the documents were to try and get somebody out to obviously come to see to them, etc., etc. And they tried to get out of the car. Now, all this took place initially in the car, where they were in the car for the best part of 5 or 10 minutes, I think, before they were able to get out. Now, Dad obviously managed to get over the barrier and then make a subsequent call to my sister Simon. My mum, on the other hand, wasn't able to get over the barrier, and what then followed is obviously now public knowledge, and we don't have my mum anymore here.
Now, what happened is that the car was hit by a lorry, and this was on the M1 in South Yorkshire in September 2018. I understand that the car was stranded for 16 minutes and 21 seconds before that collision. The understanding with smart motorways is that the car would have been detected. Have you had any information on this?
Well, that's correct. So the car was hit by another vehicle, not a lorry in our case. But yeah, it was undetected for the best part of 16 minutes. Contrary to what obviously they were supposedly implemented for, which was ease of being spotted and closing off lanes using technology and a number of other benefits that we're told, supposed benefits that we're told of. In terms of information, Naga, to be honest, very minimal. We keep getting told by the powers that be that there are numerous stock takes of the implementations and reviews of the reviews that have since taken place. We're 13 months on now from the stock take that was delivered by Grant Shapps and his team, and we're now in the midst of, if I'm not mistaken, a review of that stock take. The implementations that have come forth, I haven't got a clue, and I don't think anybody else has for that matter. It's criminal, the fact that we're still having people travel up and down these motorways as these inquiries, these reviews are ongoing, and people's lives are essentially at risk every single day whilst we await Grant and his team's review into his own workings. So, that's as much as I can say at this stage. There's minimal information that's forthcoming. If I can add, probably at this stage, I wrote to Grant not so long ago.
This was in February, wasn't it?
This was in February, that's right. And I asked a number of questions, what I thought were relatively simple questions. I got a response, and the response was pretty blasé, if I can describe it as that. Not a single one of those questions that I put to Grant at the end was answered. A simple question like if an ERA is full or if they've changed the name again, forgive me. But the emergency refuge areas, if one of them is full and this new campaign of theirs is telling us to go left, what does a failing car do at this stage? That's what we're told to do, to go into some of these stretches, and some of these stretches are, just about long enough to fit in a single HGV. So beyond that, there's not really much capacity for for any more cars. Now, I'm not sure what the secondary kind of advice is at that stage, and that was just one of 8 or 9. I hoped relatively simple questions, but I mean, not a single one was answered.
What was your understanding of what an ERA should serve?
I believe it's supposed, I mean, as the name, I suppose, suggests, it's supposed to be an area for emergency refuge. You know, if your car's broken down or on the verge of breaking down, a car is hopefully able to get to there and be able to take refuge and make the relevant calls that it needs to. But I mean, as it's transpired in the meantime, Naga, we've heard of stories from people. I mean, HGVs have been seen to just pull over and have a rest and use it as a comfort brake position rather than the emergency refuge that it's meant to be there for. And don't get me wrong, I'm not blaming the HGVs here. I mean, the communication, the education of drivers has been abysmal. The first thing I've seen, I should say, with reference to this, and I'm arguably a little bit more, I'm paying a little bit more attention, I suppose, to smart motorways, but the average person probably hasn't even seen any documents, any sort of updates to any books where, we're passing driving tests, etc., etc. I mean, you look at the highway code, and it was only recently updated for the changes in the network. And the first one, as you say, was implemented a number of years ago. So the lack of education, the lack of communication with the drivers of the network has been, abysmal, as I say.
Do you believe that smart motorways, on the whole, are a bad idea?
To be honest, on the whole, I don't. On the whole. But the way they have been implemented at this point, absolutely, because they have not delivered what was promised at the outset. Had they promised, and based on their initial findings and the trials that were undertaken, as Sir Mike Penning, alongside a number of other higher profile voices than myself, have called out, they haven't been delivered as they were described on day one, essentially. And that failure of delivery, I mean, you go into any other industry, any other walk of life, if you are signing off on points A, B, and C, you expect to be delivered points A, B, and C. But in this case, that hasn't been the case. I mean, some of the recent communications have been completely disingenuous. You look at the recent review that Grant has commented on and said we're making improvements to the network and the emergency refuge areas are now going to be at most up to a mile away. Well, on the actual trials that the smart motorways were proceeded with, the actual trial had emergency refuge areas every 600 metres. So how has it gone from a network of 600 metre ERAs, having the SVD above, the cameras, etc., the technology installed on that stretch of road in the trial, how has it gone from getting a sign-off and having it look like that to being implemented where in some situations you're looking at, an ERA every 2.5 miles at the moment? How did it go from there to there? And none of these questions have been, answered. None of the questions have had answers forthcoming from Grant or his team, for that matter.
Well, in March last year, the Transport Secretary unveiled a package of 18 measures, and a couple of those included changes to the distance between places to stop in an emergency, so that being reduced to 3/4 of a mile where feasible. So the calculation is that if a driver is typically going at 60 miles an hour, there should be one every 45 seconds. The maximum spacing will be 1 mile. And also the idea that broken down drivers would typically be detected within 20 seconds, with lanes being closed more quickly. So the radar-based system which spots stationary vehicles would be improved. There's nothing that can bring your mum back now or stop the pain and the impact of that on your family. Knowing these are the plans, does that bring some comfort?
I'd love to say yes, but honestly, Naga, at this stage, no. And the reason I say that is it's one thing saying and making promises of there will be detection technology that will detect cars within 20 seconds. I go back to a freedom of information request that was put out not so long ago, where it highlighted one of the signs, the overhead signs, was out of use for 336 days. If that's the level of service and level of care, duty of care, should we say, to the network of drivers that are using these smart motorways every single day, then these promises are just empty words. We've had them before. We've seen the stock takes going to implement, for example, 18 different measures. At this stage, we still haven't seen any evidence of what has been implemented. There are still schemes that are going ahead with under the guise of the fact there were new implementations and not existing ones. When we were told, a couple of months ago again, there's going to be a pause on all new smart motorways. Actually, if you read the grey, shall we say, extract in the middle, it was basically related only to those that have already gone ahead, not to new schemes. Therefore, new schemes are still being rolled out as we speak. And there's a number of these instances. I could go on and on and on. I mean, I've referred to a number of stats from their own stock take, which highlights a number of promises that were made and were not delivered. So, honestly, that promise of we're going to have SVD, we're going to have a number of these, implementations, doesn't reassure me. The only way, Naga, we're gonna. I mean, I'm not looking for reassurance. Let's just clarify that we've been through the pain of losing my mother, and that's essentially the worst that could happen to our family. My dad's obviously lost his life partner. Myself and my sisters have lost a loving, mother, and all the nephews and nieces that we have. She was able to have this influence on individuals where she'd become a child with children and should be an adult with all the adults in the room, and she had this personality and this aura about her. When she walked into a room, it literally just lit up because she was that sort of personality. And we've lost that, and we've lost that because of the simple fact, had there been a hard shoulder there that night, my mother and father would not have been in a situation where there was a car that came in that very lane and hit the vehicle, and the events that transpired from there wouldn't have happened. That's the worst that could have happened, and it's happened for us.
I'm so sorry. What do you need to hear from this government now?
I don't really want to hear much. I would like to see some actions. I would like to see evidence of change. The simple fix to all of this is reinstating the hard shoulder. You asked me a question earlier, Naga, about are smart motorways on the whole a bad idea? I don't believe they are. As I said, there's certain elements, the technology, the lanes that are there, at the moment, 4 lanes worth, which is reducing traffic, etc., etc. I agree with that in principle, but for the safety, I mean, that should be the first priority of any road that you're on, the safety of that road. And the safety of, these smart motorways will only be there if there is a hard shoulder in the first lane. Now, whether that's the first of 5, whether that's the first of 4 in elements, I don't know. That's for the powers to be to decide. The technology that they've introduced, the refuge areas, etc., can remain as they are. That's not necessarily a bad idea, but the way they are today is a danger to every single person, every single time that they get onto those roads. It's a danger to one's life.
That was Niaz Shazad, whose mum Nargis Begum was killed after the car she was in broke down on a smart stretch of the M1 in South Yorkshire in 2018. Now, the Department for Transport has sent the following statement. We pass our deepest condolences to Mr. Shazad and his family over the loss of his mother. Since taking office, the Secretary of State has expressed his concerns over smart motorways. Ordering the stock take review was one of his first actions, and he has committed £500 million to safety improvements. Highways England has provided the department a report setting out progress in delivering those improvements and identifying actions that can be delivered early. It will be published as soon as we have considered its contents. The safety and peace of mind of drivers and passengers using these routes remains our priority. That was a statement from the Department for Transport. Now, Sarah Simpson is a transport planner at Royal Haskellingh DHV, an independent firm commissioned to look into the safety of smart motorways. Sarah, thanks for joining me. Good morning to you.
Morning.
I should say your report, which was commissioned by solicitors investigating a different smart motorway death. So I should question really, how independent was your research? Tell me about it.
It was entirely independent. Before being instructed on this, I was quite agnostic about smart motorways. I was aware of them working in the sector, and I was peripherally aware of some concerns, but I was not aware of the details at all. The report is transparent in the evidence and the way it's been researched in order to demonstrate that level of independence.
So what have you found in comparison to what the government's found? The government found last year that smart motorways are safe. What did your research show?
So there's one key difference really between the approach taken by the Department for Transport and the approach taken in my own report. And that is the way that safety is considered fundamentally. The overarching safety objective of Highways England is to reduce the number of people who die or who are seriously injured on the roads. And yet the way that smart motorways and all lane running in particular has been considered is in the light of the total number of collisions, regardless of the severity. The report that I've produced really concentrates on that overarching safety objective, because ultimately we have to be more concerned with eliminating the number of deaths and life-changing injuries on our roads.
Right, okay. What, in terms of review, are you seeing in terms of moving this forward? So there's another review by MPs of last year's review. That's underway by the Secretary of State, Grant Shapps. That's taking place now. Still no definitive answer. And I think it was pretty clear when you heard the conversation I had with Niaz Shazad that he's very frustrated.
Yeah, and I can certainly, having listened to that interview, and my condolences certainly are with his family as well. I really do understand that level of frustration. I would say that the review that's being carried out now, it's my understanding that that is one of the reviews that was committed to in the Department for Transport's stock take. So they did say in that report that they would continue to monitor the safety of these roads. And it's my understanding that is what this investigation is. But it is odd that it hasn't yet been published. In terms of the outcome and where we go with this, ultimately, because of the way that all lane running motorways are built, the signals above the lanes, the variable message signs that are built within the verges, it is possible, if the government decides to do this, it is possible to reinstate the hard shoulder to a certain extent quite quickly and quite simply. In the longer term, if smart motorways of some description are going to form part of the road strategy for the country, then I think it would be prudent to look at a safer version of smart motorways.
Okay. Sarah Simpson, Transport Planner, thank you very much for talking to me.